Norwich School, we think, was founded over 900 years ago. It was founded by Bishop Lozinger, who was actually the first Bishop of Norwich. And he set about building the cathedral in 1096, and simultaneously would have started up a little school, training people to talk in French and Latin so that they could take part in proceedings when they left the school, such as in courts or in the actual acts of law, that kind of thing. So we get an intertwined story of about 900 years between the cathedral and the school. The first school, we certainly don't know where that was, but we've got quite a lot of written records of it, and we can date the schoolmasters and the headmasters back to about 1200. We're actually now in Norwich School Chapel. This was a building that was constructed in about 1320 by Bishop Salmon. He was a rich bishop, and he actually paid for quite a lot of this out of his own money. And its function as a carnary college was that 3 or 4 monks who lived in a building just nearby actually came to say prayers in this building 5 or 6 times a day for his actual glorification. It then continued as a chapel for 200 or 300 years until Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries. And at that point, Norwich School closed, and so did this chapel. Then, because the nation was short of schools and people who were actually learning skills that the nation needed, King Edward VI refounded schools across the country, including Norwich School. This building was actually purchased for the school in 1547. It was purchased by the city fathers, who actually needed as grammar school to actually make Norwich seem as important as they thought it was. So this building was actually empty at that time. It was awaiting destruction because entrepreneurs wished to use the stone and sell it on. But actually, now it's turning into a school. It was rescued. It was in poor repair, and it opened in 1551. And for the next 350 years, this actual space was the main classroom of Norwich School. It was no longer a chapel. Sometimes it had 300 children in here who were being taught, all in little groups. Their learning would be by rote. There were no books, and it was quite severe. You had to learn Latin passages of Latin literature or translation, and the next day, if you couldn't recite them, then you were usually caned. And most famous Norwich School boys, such as Nelson, Cook of Norfolk, all those people actually went to school in this actual room. This became a chapel again once the headmaster in 1908 could build new buildings. And for the next 20 years, from 1908 until about 1930, efforts were made to restore this and have it reconsecrated as a chapel. Unfortunately, the opening of it happened at about the time that hostilities were about to start in World War II. So instantly there were problems, because actually it was a vulnerable building. There were many air raids actually in this area, and the crypt below became an air raid shelter, and this building was difficult to use. Similarly, in the First World War, because of Zeppelin raids and the large windows, these windows allowed so much light through them that actually having services after dark was banned in here. The other thing that happened during these times of hostility was that the air raid shelter below here in the crypt was actually open to the general public. So if there was a moment when suddenly there was an air raid siren, people could go into the protected area. Today, this is actually the chapel of Norwich School, holds about 150 people, when the school is actually 1,030. So its actual use is for small groups, small musical groups, small assemblies, but it still has a beautiful building central to the actual structure of the school and its activities. Of specific interest in here, first is its architecture, because we're actually looking at a transitional period from decorated into perpendicular Gothic. So that's why this building is listed and preserved. Of particular note in here are actually the way the actual windows were copied when restored from the remnant that is in the far corner, which is actually the blocked-in window. So masons have been able to copy in restoration the exact kind of tracery. In here are the memorials to the fallen of Norwich School of 2 World Wars, actually numbering 52 on each panel. The entrance to this place was actually outside, and in the porch you'll see that schoolboys have left their names for centuries, carving them in as they stood in the porch and actually leaving a reminder of the times past. Two particular notes of carving in this chapel are the graffiti carved by boys in the organ loft. On the seating panel, you can see the names of children for about 150 years. Much further back in time are the actual bosses carved into the windows, which help to actually work across the drip mould. And they seem to be portraits of real people from medieval times. And I think Bishop Salmon got the chief mason of the cathedral to actually carve these people and insert them into the building. In one corner, there is what we think is a carving of Bishop Salmon himself.